Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns 24/7, joined, as always, by our fearless leader, the managing editor of Horns 24/7, the one and only Taylor Estes. Taylor, it is National Signing Day, and I don't know, it could just be me, but that 5-7 season feels a little further in the rearview mirror. And it feels like there is momentum in the Texas Longhorns football program. How
There
about you?
is. Yeah, Chip, I totally agree with you. I mean, the 5-7 season feels like it was probably over a month ago, and it was just a few weeks ago that Texas wrapped that up. But Texas obviously did not allow the struggles that they had on the field this season to really impact their recruiting pitch of what the coaches can really sell for the future of Texas football. And it definitely paid off on day one of the early signing period. Guys still have a few more days until I think Friday that they technically could sign. And Steve Sarkisian, and talking to him today, which is Wednesday, following the first influx of signees that came in on early signing day, he kind of hinted that there still may be some more on the table. And as we record this, it's 6:15 p.m. on Wednesday. Texas currently sits with the number 5 ranked recruiting class in 24/7 Sports Composite. And if you would have told me that, honestly, at the end of that 5-7 season, especially during that 5-game losing streak that Texas had, I probably would have said that you're crazy, or 6-game losing streak, I should say. I would have said you're crazy. I mean, it's very, I think Texas fans need to take their wins where they can get them. And this is a huge win for Texas today, Chip.
Well, and, as that season was unfolding, you thought, man, I wonder if Texas can hold this recruiting class together, because it was a top 10 class, and it had some nice elements in it, but it needed a lot more elements in it. And not only do they end up getting 6 really talented offensive linemen, we've been talking about that priority that Steve Sarkisian has put on the offensive line. We knew this was going to be a good defensive line class, because those guys, the Jere Bledsoes and Justice Finkley, those guys have been in the mix, and you've been watching these guys, and they've been committed, and it's good. But they end up getting the number 1 offensive tackle in the country in Kelvin Banks. They end up getting Malik Agbo and Nato Umayizulu, which I'm sure I just butchered that name.
I was going to say, I think I know, since I have to sit in on the state of recruiting, so I edit their podcast. I think it's Nato Omeyazulu.
Omeyazulu.
Omeyazulu. Yeah. That, if I'm butchering that, blame Nick Harris from 24/7, because I got the pronunciation from him.
And Cameron Williams, who has like the longest arms of any offensive tackle prospect in the 2022 class, or so it seems. And now you're talking about, 6 really talented offensive linemen in this class, with a chance to maybe add Devin Campbell, the nation's best interior offensive lineman, who has indicated he's going to wait till February to sign. But 7 really talented offensive linemen. And as Steve Sarkisian said today, Taylor, in his signing class, if you hit on 500, if you bat 500, if 4 of those become impact players who can help you, elevate this program and get out of the woods when it comes to offensive line recruiting. Because, I'm looking at a list of offensive line classes back to 2016, and it's a ghost town.
Yeah.
It's one miss after another. Now, there are some guys in there who, I look at the 2018 class, Junior Angalau, Reese Moore, Rafidi Girmay, Mikey Grandy, never played, Christian Jones, So 2 of the 5 in that number 3 ranked recruiting class in 2018 have been impact players, but I'm not even sure, you know, I think Junior Angalau's been a good player. Christian Jones is still developing.
Right. And Reese Moore's not on the team anymore.
Reese Moore's
So
not on the team anymore. So but you go down that list, it's just one sort of whiff after another. And then last year, one of the best years in offensive line recruiting in the state of Texas, and Texas misses on all their top targets. They hit on all their top targets this year, and they hit on top targets on the defensive line. And then you get 3 flips today, including Terrence Brooks, a high 4-star cornerback from the state of Texas, from Little Elm, who flipped from Ohio State to Texas. Now, when was the last time a kid flipped from Ohio State to Texas? And we can kind of joke that Quinn Ewers is part of that too now, but I mean, like, on signing day,
right.
it just seems like, Baron Browning and, my
Jeffrey
gosh,
Okuda
Jeffrey
and
Okuda, all the parade of Texas players,
yeah.
the running back out of
Yeah.
LaGrange.
I can't think
Um,
I was thinking
uh,
him too. He was the cousin of Jamal Charles. What's his name? Oh my gosh. I
yeah,
can't think.
so,
Yeah.
all those kids, Garrett Wilson, all those kids been going to Ohio State, and today, Texas gets a huge flip with Terrence Brooks, a top 100 player, has all the measurables you want, and that's a position that Texas has got to replenish.
Right.
And at the safety position with Brian Allen, at a time where you've just seen BJ Foster walk out the door, Chris Adamora, not that Marcus Caldwell was getting any playing time, but half your safety room just walked out the door, and Brennan Schooler just graduated. So you've got to bring in impact guys. You got to bring in guys who can help you immediately, and they got a chance. I mean, these guys have a chance to come in and help. Brian Allen is a kid out of Aledo who everyone wanted, and he's coming to Texas. And then there are other positions. I mean, Quinn Ewers, for crying out loud, the number 1 quarterback in the nation, the highest rated recruit since Vince Young, as we've talked about here. They got not only quality impact players, it appears, we never know till they hit the
Right.
field, but on paper, on signing day, it appears Texas got potential impact players at positions across the board.
Yeah. And that's what's key, Chip. You go back and, I don't want to disregard Tom Herman and his staff's signing classes, because they did really well in, signing top 10 classes and what was it, 3 straight years, 2018 to 2020. However, even I remember even when they were that 2018 class, I remember that class coming together, and it was like, geez, there's a whole lot of skill players in this class, like the best in the country's type of skill players. But where are the linemen on both sides, And then that's how it's always been. It's like Texas, and under Tom Herman, they definitely signed some very elite, highly touted, highly, rated recruits. However, it almost seemed like they were kind of like, let's just get as many of the top guys as we can and not really pay attention to position specific needs. And that was something that Steve Sarkisian, during his press conference on Wednesday, he talked about, their evaluation process, everything that goes into it. But the biggest thing was not just signing guys just to sign guys. It was signing, the top tier of the guys that they had on their list, but doing so at positions where they need it most. And that's absolutely in the trenches. I mean, I thought it was really interesting during Steve Sarkisian's press conference. He was asked about if the 2022 signing classes, kind of, are you starting to build the roster to get ready for SEC play whenever Texas does move to the SEC? And Steve Sarkisian, he acknowledged, he's like, he thinks that when you win, you need big humans, as he likes to call them, in the trenches on both sides of the ball. But he did bring that up. He did say, yeah, I mean, there's a physical brand of football that's played in the SEC, and you got to start building your roster to be prepared for that. And he and Kyle Flood and Jeff Banks and a lot of these guys, even Blake Gidding, being at Ole Miss last season, there's a lot of these guys who have coached for SEC programs, and they understand the importance to have those guys in the trenches. And there's no denying, in my opinion, Chip, looking at this class, and it's easy to say this on signing day, who knows who's going to, develop into their potential, who may not. That's been one of the issues with Texas. But in looking at this class today, December 15th, on the day one of early signing period, I think that Texas could not have done a better job. I mean, there's obviously guys that they may have missed on, but when you look at the overall picture of this 2022 signing class, even before we really get into the portal talk, Texas is not only doing really well, but I think that they absolutely just, won the day for sure. And they really added some difference makers at positions where they absolutely need it. And now it's going to be interesting after the early signing period ends to see where they go in the portal, because, Texas, they still have potentially the opportunity to add more players. Steve Sarkisian mentioned that they could, next year have up to 35 new scholarship players because of different, NCAA recruiting rules with the transfer portal, all of that. And the ability to add more bodies there, depending on who you lose to the portal, whatnot. So, wow, like we're sitting here saying that this is a huge get for Texas, a huge haul by Texas, and getting those type of guys, the elite guys at positions of need, that's really could potentially be only the beginning of what's to come. But because really right now, Texas, they went after Quinn Ewers. Obviously, that was a huge priority in the transfer portal, but the staff wanted to secure some of their top, guys on from the high school ranks, and then they were really going to hit the portal stuff hard. So while this is awesome, I still think this is an awesome day for Texas fans. This is a monster class, honestly, for Steve Sarkisian, especially coming out of that 5-7 season. But I really don't think it's done, and Texas could not only add some additional difference makers potentially at the high school level, but those transfer portal players who could be, ready to go a lot sooner than some of the guys coming out of high school.
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't hurt to have a pancake factory pop up in your neighborhood, I mean, two of the unsung here, well, six, there are six, board members, Rob Blair, we know, and Rick Vasquez, we know they did the Burnt Ends NIL initiative. We talked to Cade Brewer last week. Everybody needs to check out that interview on the Flagship podcast interview, because he takes you inside the right down to the payment plan of the Burnt Ends NIL initiative. Well, then Rob Blair and Rick Vasquez announced the Pancake Factory, where every scholarship offensive lineman, I think it was announced on December 5th, 10 days before signing day, every scholarship offensive lineman up to 14, $800,000 worth, are going to get paid $50,000 annually. And lo and behold, Texas has six of the best offensive line recruits in the country, possibly Devin Campbell joining that group. You'd have seven. And this is an area where Texas is sorely lacking. And obviously, look, Steve Sarkisian said that the NIL is real. And he's like, I don't know when these NIL initiatives are going to pop up. And when they do, sometimes the money seems like that can't be real, but it is real. Mm-hmm. And he's like, if players can, profit off of their name, image, and likeness, and it doesn't impact their studies or their ability to play on the field, then I'm all for it. Well, heck yeah. Because, who knows what impact, but it certainly had to have some, Taylor. And that's what Texas fans have wanted. They were worried at first that Texas was going to fall behind in NIL. Then they realized, oh, we're the answer. Mm-hmm. We, the supporters of the program, the donors who want to put money together, we are the answer. And, thanks to efforts like, those being done by Rick Vasquez, Rob Blair, Nick Shuley with the Clark Field Collective, Texas appears to be sort of on the cutting edge of these NIL initiatives, and they have 6 signatures on letters of intent from some of the best offensive linemen in the country to prove it.
Right. Yeah, and that's, Chip, I know that there are a lot of opposing fan bases, especially right now, that are, I mean, we're tagged in all of the commitment tweets and all of that, and signing tweets of some of these offensive linemen. So you see, if you look at our Twitter mentions, you'll see some of the comments, and pretty much every comment, anytime that Texas, since essentially this the Horns with Heart NIL initiative with Pancake Factory was launched, everything from opposing fan bases is about, oh, I bet there's 50,000 reasons why you want to go play football at Texas. But I think, and I get that. Like, it does seem kind of weird that this is where we are. The people that they need to be mad at is the NCAA, because the NCAA just was like, wash their hands, like, no, we're not gonna regulate this, except for if, as long as it doesn't come from the schools. If you want to complain about the current state of the name, image, and likeness earning potential for college athletes, especially with what Texas is doing right now, you got to point the finger at the NCAA. But Steve Sarkisian brought this up today. He's like, I mean, at a place like the University of Texas, with the size of the alumni base, the amount of really high money type of donors and boosters that the Longhorns do have, the network of companies and business owners that are alumni. He's like, if you're at a place like Texas, there obviously are going to be more NIL opportunities available to players. And as you mentioned, he said that as long as it doesn't take away from what they need to be doing on the field and in the classroom, he didn't say this word for word, but essentially he was hinting at, you'd kind of be foolish not to take advantage of this right now, because the NCAA hasn't regulated it. And, him talking about, he doesn't know where the NIL future is headed, what's going to happen down the line, AKA if it's ever going to be regulated. But I feel like right now, if you are at a program, of the size of Texas, with the donor base and the alumni base of a place like Texas, and you're not coming up with these type of initiatives, you can quickly fall behind, in especially in recruiting. I know that the coaches can't really sell recruits on, oh, hey, if you sign with us, you'll make $50,000, but come August, at the beginning of August of 2022. But you know what they can do? Be like, oh yeah, look at this initiative just started. I mean, there's really just, it's all kind of a gray area, I feel like, right now, and Texas is benefiting from that in a big way. And I think a lot of Texas fans and fans in general of sports, college sports, I should say, like to bash the NCAA. But if you're a Texas fan right now, you need to be like, thank you, NCAA, for not paying attention to or regulating this, and just kind of washing your hands of the name, image, and likeness earning potential, because as you've seen, it obviously is going to pay off. I mean, this isn't just, as you mentioned, it's $50,000 annually. So if these offensive linemen redshirt and then they're on campus for 4 years, that's $250,000 to, plus, their school and tuition and room and board and getting stipends and all of that coming in, their scholarship money. I mean, that's difference making money, especially for, 18 to 22-year-olds. So there's no denying that Texas is an easy selling point, I think, for Texas. And they definitely have benefited and, taken the bull by the horns in a way, and kind of ran with it with some of these initiatives that have come up lately. And it sounds like there may be some more coming too.
Yeah, I mean, it's with the Clark Field Collective, we don't even really know. They have a $10 million base to start with. $10 million, Taylor. And we don't even know how they're going to spend it. They're trying to help all sports. And, they have TJ Ford working with basketball, Kenny Vaccaro working with football, Julianne Fawcett Johnson working with volleyball. They're looking for baseball and every other sport to help figure out how best to help Texas student athletes in those sports benefit from NIL opportunities. But this is what I always say. Nick Saban lives in the gray. When the NCAA approved a strength coach for every position, or unlimited strength coaches, excuse me, he hired a strength coach for every position group on his team at Alabama.
Mhm.
And then the rest of the NCAA was like, we didn't really mean that, because basically he hired a coach for each of those positions to work with guys all through the offseason. So then they capped it at 3 and said you can have unlimited analysts. Well, Nick Saban has, hired the former coaches association as his
Seriously.
analyst group and goes until the NCAA says no. And that's where you have to live. I mean, Gary Patterson talked about it. You have to live in the gray. And Texas is finally living in the gray. And by God, if you're going to try and compete in the SEC, you better have a lot of real estate in the gray until the NCAA tells you no. So, and we should mention, if you've been reading and following along at Horns 24/7, the Insider last week was all about these NIL initiatives and the fact that they have been working with UT compliance to make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed and the contracts are legit. And so here we are. But what an amazing signing day, Taylor, because, it's 20 years ago that Texas signed the transformative 2002 recruiting class that had Vince Young and Casey Studdard and Lyle Senline, Justin Blaylock, Brian Robinson, Rod Wright, Aaron Ross, arguably the greatest recruiting class in Texas football history. And that class would change the program, go on to win a national championship, laid the groundwork for more recruits to come for a decade of dominance on, with Colt McCoy and Earl Thomas, and the list goes on and on. And it takes not only one of these classes like were signed today by Texas, but it takes stacking them. And what we heard from Steve Sarkisian today is that he's got the staff to recruit. Jeff Banks, we know, is a recruiting monster. Nick Saban was furious when he lost Jeff Banks from the Alabama staff. You heard Steve Sarkisian give credit to Terry Joseph in the work that he put in to flip, Terrence Brooks and Xavier Bryce and and so you got to have relentless recruiters. And Sarkisian said, in flipping Terrence Brooks, Xavier Bryce, Ethan Burke, we just don't stop recruiting and we don't burn bridges. We don't get in our feelings. When Quinn Ewers turns us down to go to Ohio State, we wish him well. We don't pout and get in our feelings and put out some stupid tweet that burns a bridge in recruiting. You try to be respectful and cheer them on. And then if there's a chance to rekindle that conversation as there was in the Quinn Ewers recruitment, then you just try to be open and honest. And that's what Steve Sarkisian said. And here he is with not only Quinn Ewers, but Malik Murphy, who's got one of the biggest arms in this 2022 quarterback class and is a bit of a raw product. But wow, I mean, that's what they said about Lamar Jackson. And, not that they're similar, they're not. But, if Steve Sarkisian, who's helped develop Carson Palmer and Eric, Matt Castle and Matt Leinart and, the list goes on, Mac Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts. Well, then he said, these quarterbacks pay attention to that stuff. This is what they aspire and have hopes of doing. So it's a good day to be a Texas Longhorn today.
Yeah, and doing, and Steve Sarkisian talking about them being relentless recruiters, they never stop recruiting. I mean, especially now with the transfer portal, you have to make sure that you're not burning bridges. I mean, I kind of go back, Chip, and I'm not trying to bash Tom Herman too much, but I go back to Jordan Elliott, who was committed to Tom Herman at Houston prior to him taking the Texas job. And he's on campus at Texas and he ends up transferring to Mizzou. Well, everything we heard from behind the scenes was because big reason why he transferred was because Tom Herman came in and essentially berated him for decommitting from Houston, even though he was on the roster then. I mean, and so the fact that, if you're there's more things obviously that Chip and I and our staff at Horns 24/7 knew that have gone on behind the scenes with various staffs that have been at Texas. And there's been quite a few in the last 10 years, obviously. So we could all probably write, 18 novels probably on what goes on behind the scenes at Texas for the last decade. But this is a huge, change of pace, I would say, from the head coach, because we did know that there were burned bridges in the past that ended up hurting Texas with, not just in recruiting, but also keeping guys on the roster that were at Texas and had signed with Texas. And this is a different ball game, and I know that probably sounds weird because Texas has had a number of players enter the transfer portal, but that was not unintentional. These are, I think, the players that entered the transfer portal essentially were told by Steve Sarkisian what the writing on the wall was, and maybe it said it's not, Texas is not the place for them, or they should, test the waters elsewhere. So it's a really interesting change of pace, Chip, and I know that there's a lot of things to be a little question right now, I guess, with Steve Sarkisian and the staff because of the outcome of year one of this coaching staff leading at Texas. But if this amount of recruiting, what they've been able to do coming off that season, the 5-7 season where they're not going to a bowl game, if they're able to land these type of recruits, they've already shown their ability to develop their guys at other stops, as long as they had the players to develop. And that goes, across a lot of these guys. I shouldn't say all of them because I think there's still some that are, green in their coaching careers. But you look at, Steve Sarkisian, what he did at every single stop at the quarterback position. You look at Jeff Banks, he's highly regarded as the best special teams coordinator in the country. And he's a great, tight ends coach. He's a great recruiter. You look at Kyle Flood. He was able to develop so many offensive linemen at Alabama. I mean, the list goes on. And so I think that this is a huge step in the right direction for Texas. And if you're a Texas fan right now, you got to, have a little bit of patience, I think, to let these guys have some time to develop their guys. But if they're able to develop these type of players like they were at other programs, and they're able to recruit this way, that is how you build the momentum and you stack the classes year after year that ends up leading to what you mentioned, that 2002 class being the start of, a decade of dominance at Texas football. If they can, kind of take that path, I'm not saying that they're going to win a national championship or anything next year like that, but if they can follow along that path and continue to stack these recruiting classes, that's how you change the trajectory of a football program. And that's something, that Texas has struggled to do. And I think a lot of it was, not necessarily recruiting the guys at positions of need, just trying to get the best, ranked signing class. And that goes back to Mac Brown, honestly, I think, but looking at, rankings more so than anything else over position of need. So this is a change of pace for Texas football and Texas football recruiting. But it's I think if you're a Longhorn fan, it's a much welcome change of pace for, as opposed to what's going on for the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I thought one of the key comments from Steve Sarkisian on signing day was the fact that he said we didn't just go for rankings, we went for fit.
Mhm.
We brought in players who he said you have to have 3 criteria. You have to be an innate competitor. You have to want to compete at all times. He talked about having that responsibility to being a good teammate and if these kids in this signing class are more about the fit and the fire that they found, then let's go. Because
Mhm.
you and I have joked, if Steve Sarkisian recruits are going to mirror Xavier Worthy, then let's get on with it. And
Right.
so, here he is. He brings in Brennan Thompson. He talks about Brennan Thompson, who's a speed receiver along the lines of, built similar to Xavier Worthy, and how he went on his first in-home visit to Brennan Thompson and Spearman, and he basically met the whole town in like a 3 to 4 hour period because it's a small town, um, and so if that's what we're talking about here, then I can't wait to see how these kids develop because, you hear about NATO Umuzalo.
Omeo Zulu. Um,
Umeo Zulu.
Oneo
How
Zulu,
am I
I
doing?
believe.
And how
Hey, I
nasty he
literally
is.
have a pronunciation thing here. Oh, you can't see it on here, but I have it on my paper here trying to spell it out.
You know, I'm just going to call him NATO.
Yeah, NATO.
You hear how nasty NATO is, how nasty Agbo is, how massive Cameron Williams is, the 6'7", 360-pound tackle with maybe the longest arms in the 2022 offensive line class. And if these are the personality, competitive fire fits of this coaching staff and not just the recruiting rankings, because Mac did fall prey to recruiting the rankings. I mean, we can go back to Tyrone Swoops and how he was once a 5-star, and Mac Brown said, if I don't take, Tyrone Swoops, I'm going to get run out of town. And neither Brian Harsin nor Major Applewhite wanted Tyrone Swoops as a
Or Dwayne
quarterback.
Akina either.
In Akina, they would have taken him as a tight end, which he ended up being, and went to the NFL as a tight end. Anyway, if these coaches have pinpointed that kind of competitive fire and talent and measurables, then this is incredibly exciting, and maybe it will be a historic recruiting class, because as you said, there have been highly ranked top 3 classes for Texas in the last 5 years, but they haven't had the guys up front. They haven't had the big guys on the offensive and defensive lines. They've been heavy in the defensive backfield or at the skill positions. And even some of those skill positions haven't worked out, especially at receiver. And so this is exciting. And I think that, look, we won't know for 2 to 3 to 5 years how well this class is going to turn out. There's been a lot of attrition. Hell, Chris Del Conte talked about the attrition in his 40 Acres Insider, when kind of defending the 5-7 season near the end of the season. That made a lot of Texas fans mad. But the bottom line is there has been a lot of attrition.
It's true. Yeah, it may make you mad, but it's true. I mean, the proof of the pudding's in the eating, and there you go. That's where it
And the
is.
talk was he needs to bring in his own players. Needs to bring in his own players. Well, this is a hell of a first step.
Yeah.
And bringing
Yeah,
in
no
your own
doubt.
players.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, the old adage is, you win and lose games in the trenches, and that's true regardless of the level of football. I mean, even like go back to even when Johnny Manziel was at Texas A&M. If he had an even capable defensive line or defense, I mean that A&M team would have been really, I mean, better than it already was. But I mean that's the reality of it. You can only do so much with skill players, especially at big dog college football, Power 5 conferences. And if Texas is going to be moving to the SEC anywhere from the next 2 to 4 years, I guess it would be at this point, then this is what you got to start getting used to. Now, I still think that Texas does need to add some more receivers to the roster. It'll be interesting, I think, to see if they go in the portal for that, because I do think that they need some more depth at that position. However, they've got to start with depth on the defensive line and the offensive line, which is exactly what they did. And then kind of let it go from there. I mean, think about if Texas had even a I don't want to say mediocre because that sounds bad, but even a decent offensive line this season, it would be a different game. We wouldn't be sitting here talking about Texas being at home for a bowl game or Texas having a 5-7 season. We would be talking about probably the signing class plus leading into a bowl game of who Texas is facing. But that the reality is Texas didn't have that on the offensive line. And that just goes to show how crucial that position and defensive line too really is in college football. And this is definitely a step in the right direction for Texas.
Yeah, and it's not all great news. We talked about Kobe McKenzie flipping from Oklahoma to Texas. Well, he ends up signing with Oklahoma. He gets re-recruited back to OU by Brent Venables, and Texas, didn't end up with Armani Wingfield. And so that gets to your question about the depth at receiver and where do they go in terms of the portal to bring in talent. And Stan Drayton is leaving to become the head coach at Temple, which is, as Steve Sarkisian said, great for Stan Drayton. But Drayton's done a great job of bringing in talented running backs, developing running backs, in the recruitment of Bijan Robinson, the development of Roshan Johnson. Jonathan Brooks is a player, and so they'll have to find a new running backs coach. But congratulations to Stan Drayton. A lot of people didn't see that one coming, but the athletic director at Temple is Arthur Johnson, who just spent the last 7 years at Texas, as a senior associate athletic director in charge of facilities and operations. Steve Patterson promoted him from, being basically, the chief of staff for football. And now Arthur is the AD at Temple. He lets go of Rod Carey. He's bringing in Stan Drayton, and that's a great opportunity for him. And Steve Sarkisian said, we'll go, it gives us an opportunity to go bring in another great addition to the staff. So they will have some work to do there, and they need to get some help at linebacker, and so that will be interesting because I know people aren't talking much about the linebackers in this class. But Travell Johnson, the thing that out of Arlington Martin, the thing I'm told the coaches love about him is that he is as physical as you will find. That he just is all about contact and is violent. And so, one of those 3 criteria that I was mentioning that I failed to mention earlier is football IQ.
Mhm.
Okay, well, let's see it. That's a critical position for Texas to improve its physicality, its athleticism, its football IQ, and so let's see, what Texas can bring or get out of Travell Johnson, and then obviously they're going to need to add some help at linebacker in the portal. And that's what's amazing. I mean, we were talking about Sarkisian mentioning 33, up to 33 new members of the roster. Now it's 36 or 37, Taylor.
I know, it's crazy. I mean, the transfer portal, era of college football has totally changed, but I think, depending on who's on which side of it, I think it's changed in a good way from the players, being able to not have to sit out a year immediate, or, if you transfer. However, obviously, this couldn't work out for some players, but I think that linebacker is probably a key position where you may want to get a little bit more experience added to the roster. I mean, obviously, Texas does have DeMarvion Overshone, returning, which I think is a big addition, not just for Texas. I think that was a very smart move for Overshone as well. I think he could really benefit from another year playing at that linebacker position after he moved to the position in 2020. I also think he could really benefit from a healthy off season in the strength and conditioning program. I think he could probably afford to add a little bit of bulk and mass to his frame there. But I think that it's going to be interesting to see who Texas does target in the transfer portal. But I think linebackers, obviously one that it doesn't hurt you to get a guy that already has collegiate experience at that position, since a lot of times, that middle of the defense is supposed to be quote unquote the quarterback of the defense. And with DeMarvion Overshone only having 1 year of eligibility left, Texas definitely needs to at least start building depth for the future. But I think that could potentially present itself in the transfer portal. I don't necessarily think at this point, as of December 15th, I'm saying that it's a huge concern right now for Texas. I think that they could, see some guys in the transfer portal head their way, similar to, how I know it's a little bit different, but how Ovia Gofu and Ray Thornton and Ben Davis, came in at that edge position that Texas really needed to add depth to. you've already seen the coaches being able to work the transfer portal and get guys that see the field, not just add bodies to add bodies. They, all of those guys contributed when they were healthy. Mainly, I know Ben Davis didn't contribute too much because he had that lingering foot injury. However, they did contribute. So this staff already has proven that they can get transfer portal guys, get them ready, and get them on the field. So I think linebacker, wide receiver are going to be some to watch there. But there's definitely no shortage, even though it's signing day, Chip. There's still a lot, I think, of excitement to come if you're a Texas fan. So you definitely want to make sure you're over at Horns 24/7. Make sure you sign up for an annual membership. You'll get 30% off your first year of Texas Scoop. And you'll also get the ability to read all other message boards, all other VIP content across the 24/7 Sports Network, which is a huge perk that I know a lot of competing media sites do not offer. So that's a big advantage that 24/7 has. So make sure you go sign up for an annual membership and keep up on this madness, because this is one of the craziest signing periods I think I've covered, at least since the early signing period debuted, I think in 2017, Chip.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get to love it or leave it, I'll just leave this here. Um, Gary Patterson, the former TCU coach, who's had a lot of opportunity since being let go at TCU. There's still a chance that something develops with Gary Patterson in Texas. We are following that closely. We reported earlier in the week that Gary Patterson and Steve Sarkisian, the defensive coaching staff, are expected to meet, in the next couple days. So something could develop there. It might not, but I think there's a good chance something could develop. And so get over to Horns 24/7 and make sure you're locked in and getting all the latest on everything. And Texas basketball, for crying out loud. Heck, I'll be in Vegas this weekend covering the Texas men and women in that Pac-12 Coast to Coast Challenge. The Texas men taking on with Dylan Dizu back finally from that knee surgery that he had after injuring that knee at Vanderbilt last year as the SEC's leading rebounder. He is playing. He played for Texas in that win over Arkansas Pine Bluff this week. So get over to Horns 24/7. All right, Taylor, you ready for some love it or leave it?
I am, Chip. Before we get to love it or leave it, we are going to take a really quick break, but you'll want to stay tuned because we will continue to talk the 2022 signing class that Texas put together during the early signing period. So stay tuned. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will continue on here to love it or leave it. Chip, you ready for some love it or leave it?
Let's go. What a signing day. Let's go.
All right. Our signing day special. My first one for you is love it or leave it. It's always good to have a pancake factory at your disposal come signing day.
Yeah, I mean, I think every Texas fan needs to send a Christmas card to Rob Blair and Rick Vasquez and the other four unnamed board members of Horns with Heart for starting the Pancake Factory. It is brilliantly constructed as a 501c3, so that money, paid to the student athletes will be for the charitable work that those student athletes do. Whether it's, they've mentioned Habitat for Humanity projects, whether it's, championing a cause in their hometowns. And, you know, it's, it's a feel good, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you're paying kids $50,000 to use their name, image, and likeness for charitable causes. I mean, there are a lot worse things that kids get paid for. I mean, the running joke is that someone just leaves a duffel bag full of cash, with on your doorstep, and and then you just go
The running
bonkers.
joke or the reality? Just kidding.
These guys are trying to pay these kids when they're not getting a scholarship stipend, as again, if you watch our interview with Cade Brewer, he talks about this, that, the months where you don't get a scholarship stipend tend to be, during the summer months. And so these guys are trying to help these kids get paid all year long because of the NIL opportunities. So yes, with 6, maybe 7, if Devin Campbell comes around in February, Devin Campbell, the top interior lineman in the country. This would be an amazing recruiting haul, and Texas fans should be sending a Christmas card to Horns with Heart for starting this pancake factory. So yes, I'm going to love this. Taylor, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question you have to love this if you're a Texas fan, especially if you are not a Texas fan. I imagine you hate this, But again, I mean, it goes back to what we were saying earlier in the show, Chip. Right now, essentially, if you're not taking advantage of the NCAA really not having very much guidance or direction for the ability to profit off of your name, image, and likeness, and you have the possibility of getting left in the dust. And with how quickly recruiting moves, and with the transfer portal and not having to sit out a year if you transfer, all of these things that have kind of lined up, you need to be ahead of the game, I think, right now when it comes to the NIL earning potential, and using that to quote unquote sell it. I know it sounds bad in recruiting, and to potential recruits, by having the information out there of these NIL initiatives, like the Horns with Heart, and the Pancake Factory and everything. And obviously it paid off. I mean, was it coincidental timing? I don't know. Steve Sarkisian was asked about that today, if he knew that initiative was coming out, right before they signed this monster offensive line haul that they got on day one of early signing period. And he said that he basically kind of played not dumb or anything, but said like, oh, I didn't know much about it. I don't know much about NIL. And then he just kind of went on to that. I mean, this obviously benefited Texas in a huge, huge way. And so, yeah, there's no question that it's good to have a pancake factory at your disposal if you are, especially when you are approaching the signing periods, because it clearly paid off for the first one for Texas.
Because before the Pancake Factory was announced, they had commitments from Cole Hudson and Connor Robertson.
Yes. A
who
4-star and a 3-star.
Right. And now they have a signature from the number 1 offensive tackle in the nation. My man Cameron Williams, who again may have the longest arms of any offensive lineman in the 2022 class, and 2 nasties in Nato and Agbo. Yeah. Christmas card to Horns with Heart, kids. All right.
No
Love it or leave
doubt
it.
about it.
Love it or leave it number 2.
All right, my second one for you is love it or leave it. The best surprise of National Signing Day was top 100 4-star cornerback Terrence Brooks flipping from Ohio State to Texas.
You know what? I'm going to love this because it's Ohio State. Now, look, Xavion Bryce flipped from Oklahoma to Texas. That always works for Texas fans. But Terrence Brooks is, I mean, he is a high 4-star player. I know he's a top 100 player, but it's Ohio State that Texas is finally, pulling one of their own back from leaving the state and going to, Ohio State's been pulling kids out of Texas for years under Urban Meyer, and then even under Ryan Day. And so, this to me, and again, Texas has got to reload at corner because you lose Josh Thompson, who could have come back, didn't. They are going to have Deshaun Jameson back. But then you've got some younger guys who are still proving themselves, like Jahdae Barron and Keaton Crawford. You lose Darian Dunn. They need impact guys at corner and safety, and Terrence Brooks, come on down. I'm going to love this, Taylor. How about you?
Yeah, I think you have to love it. I mean, this was, in my opinion, the biggest flip of the day. Obviously, Texas adding Malik Agbo was a huge addition, later in the day, and you don't want to overlook that. But I mean, you're right. I think the fact that when you look at how successful Ohio State has been at poaching some of the top talent in the state of Texas away from, state schools and schools inside the state lines, then I think that you have to think of this as a win. And by the way, I did remember who the other one the Ohio State running back that we were trying to remember. J.K. Dobbins is the one.
J.K.
Yeah.
Dobbins.
You said Ohio State just in your answer, it clicked. I was like, oh, that's right. But yeah, I mean, you look at the history of how well Ohio State has really recruited the state of Texas. And I think a lot of that had to do with, Texas, especially, falling behind both in recruiting and on the field. It really opened up the floodgates for other out of state programs to come in and poach some of the best talent because they had more to sell. And the fact that Texas not only added Terrence Brooks, flipped him on day one of the early signing period, but they also have the nation's highest rated quarterback prospect coming out of high school since Vince Young and Quinn Ewers that they also poached away from Ohio State. Yeah, I think that anytime that if you're, and this probably sounds weird because it's not like a rival school or anything like that, but I feel like anytime if you are a school who is in a recruiting hotbed, like Texas, like the state of Texas is, and you've been constantly on the losing end of the situation with other out of state programs coming in and getting the best players to sign with them instead of with their hometown or home state school, any type of win you can get against those programs is huge. And Ohio State's been one of the biggest ones. I mean, Alabama's been up there too, but Ohio State has been consistently successful for the last two head coaches there of getting some of the top talent in Texas to go to Columbus. So, yes, absolutely. I think that this is a really big surprise for Texas fans. Again, I think, the addition of Malik Agbo was a really good one too. And Calvin Banks leading up to signing day. But if we're talking about today, I think this is one of the wins that Texas fans should definitely celebrate as one of the best surprises. So I'm going to love it too.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot to love
Yes.
today if you're a Texas fan. All right, love it or leave it, number 3.
All right, my final one for you, Chip, is love it or leave it. The 2022 signing class will end up going down as the best recruiting class at Texas since 2002.
Okay, I'm gonna slow down here. I'm gonna leave this out of respect to everyone in that 2002 class, which had a special chemistry in part because they followed a couple of really high profile recruiting classes with some kind of me guys at the skill positions, and they came in and said, we're getting rid of that. We're gonna make it about the team. And they were a special group. You've got this great recruiting class, but we don't know if this class is going to bond like that 2002 class. We don't know if Quinn Ewers is going to end up being, Vince Young 2.0. So I'm going to leave this, but man, I'd love to come back in 3 or 4 years and say, this was the best recruiting class since 2002, Taylor. I can't go there yet, so I'm going to leave it, but man, maybe it's got a chance. How about you?
It's really hard, I think, for me to love it right now just because I feel like Texas has signed some really, top tier signing classes over the last several years, and they just didn't pan out. So I think that the jaded journalist side of me that is, for every year, the best season I have covered at Texas was that Sugar Bowl season in the 2018 season. Um, I think that the jaded side of me wants to be like tap the brakes too. However, I don't know if I can point to a signing class at this point in, since 2002 that would surpass it, Chip. I mean, you have to think that that's the biggest thing is like on paper right now, there's no question that I think this is the best recruiting class at Texas since 2002. When you look at every single position, they still have some needs to address, and they have a few months to get those situations ironed out, so it's not done yet. But I think that it's really difficult for me to look back at any other signing class that Texas has had since that 2002 class and say that it goes toe to toe or surpasses the potential of this one personally. So, I was always, obviously it was always a huge deal. The 2018 signing class that Tom Herman got had some of the best skill players in the country, some of the best, probably the best defensive back overhaul in modern day recruiting. I think that's fair to say that Texas did get that. However, I was always very hesitant to anoint those classes as being like far, elite classes or even on the same level as, say, a 2002 signing class that Texas had, because they lacked some really monster pieces. And I'm not using that as hyperbole. And they didn't have the linemen to really match it, but still, I mean, they were missing some crucial pieces to the puzzle, and obviously they didn't pan out the way that I think a lot of people expected. So I'm kind of torn. I kind of want to love it, but I don't want to say that I think that this class is going to surpass the 2002 class at the end of the day. I think that if we're talking about this is the best recruiting class since, I don't really have much to go off of to deny that being the case at this point. And obviously, time will tell. We'll see if these guys stick around with transfer portal. You never know who will be here even come the start of this season. I mean, my goodness, with how crazy the wild west transfer portal really is. But right now, I'm going to say, I think I'm going to have to say that I'm going to love this and say this is the best signing class that Texas has landed since the 2002, not over the 2002. Since the 2002, it's too hard for me to really deny that this one surpasses Texas and checks way more boxes off for Texas as opposed to some of their other elite, recruiting hauls they've had in other years.
Well, the fact that we're even having this conversation should excite Texas fans to the nth degree, and so
And that we're talking about big men. I love big men. Like, big men touchdowns are my favorite things in all of sports, like literally my favorite. So I'm excited. If I'm not even a Texas fan, obviously it's my job to cover Texas. Our jobs are easier if they're good. I haven't seen very many good years in my career covering Texas, but I think you have to be excited about this haul, Chip. I mean, my goodness, big men get it done, and Texas added quite a few and still have some on the table.
Yeah, and Kyle Flood, with his pedigree, having coached in the NFL, having helped develop the monsters at Alabama that won a national championship last year. This is the time for Texas and Steve Sarkisian and Kyle Flood and Jeff Banks to cash in on their pedigree at Alabama. I mean, if you weren't going to convince the kids in state who watched last year's national championship and know what an offense with talent can look like, you might not have gotten it going. So this was essential. And as we talk about the SEC, Texas has to start stacking classes like this. Look at A&M. I mean, A&M's trying to stack, top 5 classes one after the other, and they beat Alabama this year, but they still went 8-4.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to compete in the SEC, you've got to stack classes like this every year, and obviously you're not going to have a year where you can bring in 36 or 37 players. That's another reason why this year was so critical. So kudos to Steve Sarkisian and this coaching staff for a phenomenal signing day. And it's not over yet. As we've mentioned, there are still targets out there some may come in the portal, some may not sign till February, but all the more reason to get over to Horns 24/7, hang out with us, and stay up to speed on every single thing, including what develops after this meeting between Texas, the coaching staff, and Gary Patterson. So everybody, thanks for listening, and Merry Flipmas, Merry signing day,
Merry
and
Quinmas, right?
Quinmas.
I'm taking that to the grave, as corny as it was. I'm gonna take it
Oh
with
yeah,
me.
it's
Copyright.
early
Flagship podcast, Taylor
Christmas.
Estes.
That's right. Early Christmas for Texas fans. Thanks for listening, everybody. Make sure that you check out the Flagship podcast interview with Cade Brewer so that you get up to speed on, he's actually been paid NIL money. And it's the same group that put together the Pancake Factory. So get the insight by watching that interview. And I believe we're going to be talking, well, should we tease that, Taylor, or should we just say, make sure you tune in on Monday to the Flagship podcast interview?
I think let's tease it, but we're teasing it for a reason. I think Texas fans will like to hear from our guest for sure.
Yeah, Blake Brockermeyer, former Longhorn All-American on the offensive line, will weigh in on what Steve Sarkisian was able to do after missing on Blake Brockermeyer's two sons in the 2021 class. They have come back and obviously loaded up on the offensive line. Blake does a great job of keeping up with everything going on in recruiting in the college football world. So,
hey, to be fair, real quick, to be fair, Chip, Steve Sarkisian and co did not miss out on the Brockermeyers. Right. They actually signed the Brockermeyers. They just were at a different school when they signed him and Kyle Flood. So
that's right.
Yeah.
So Steve Sarkisian and Kyle Flood are on a roll.
Yeah.
Because they did sign the Brockermeyers last year at a different school. Right. And of course, Blake's son, Luke Brockermeyer, torn ACL. We'll get an update on that as well. So everybody, thanks for listening. Merry Christmas. And for Taylor Estes, I am Chip Brown. We'll see you over at Horns 24/7. And until the next episode of the Flagship podcast, stay safe and keep the faith.